Okay, continuing chapter 9, the Avatamsaka. What I thought I might do tonight, kind of neglected this last week. We came back last week after, 5 weeks? No, 5 months. Wow, so that's a long time that we took a break from this text. And I just jumped back into the middle of this without trying to do something that's very useful, which is to look at the larger context of this. So what I wanted to do to start tonight is really go through the 10 verses, just read them out in English, so we get a feel for these 10 verses, because each of these verse sections of the text are things unto themselves. They're sort of a focus on a couple of major themes or subject matters. So as I was getting ready today, looking at this, I could see it would be very useful if we just did that. So if you look at page 59 of my text, actually 58, 59, and so it's Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of Great Wisdom, who is now speaking in the gathering of all these beings that have come together to hear the teachings. Manjushri then speaks these verses. So this is towards the end of this chapter, but if you can find, everybody have it on their page. In the Chinese, it's, let's see what that, 光达苦行戒修习日夜精气无间怠. So it's, and I'm just going to read these through without messing much with the translation, although it's something we can do at another time, kind of play around with rendering it differently, but just use the English translation here to get a few. He, referring to the Enlightened One, cultivates or cultivated all the profuse and great bitter practices, vigorously throughout the day and night without weariness or fatigue. He has already rescued those who are difficult to rescue by means of his lion's roar, because universally transforming living beings is his practice. Next verse, living beings flow and turn in the sea of love and desire, covered over by the net of ignorance and greatly worried and oppressed. The one of utmost humaneness and courage completely pulls them out, vowing or resolving that it will be this way in his practice, or made true by his practice. We in the world are remiss and attached to the 5 desires. We make unreal discriminations and thereby receive a score of suffering. We should uphold and practice the Buddha's teachings and always gather in our minds, vowing to save all such as these is his practice. Living beings become attached to a self. This is where we started last week. And enter birth and death. They seek its boundaries but cannot obtain it. We should wholeheartedly serve the thus come, and I would say harvest the wonderful Dharma. Expounding it to others is his practice. Living beings have no recourse and are bound up with sickness. They sink into evil destinies by giving rise or generating 3 poisons. They are continually scorched by great ranging flames. Using pure mind to save them is his practice. Living beings, confused and deluded, lose the proper path. Constantly walking in crooked paths, they enter dark places. For their sakes, the lamp of proper Dharma is lit, eternally giving off a brilliant illumination. That's his practice. Living beings bob and sink in the sea of existence. Their distress and difficulties are limitless and without end. And for their sake, he builds or constructs a mighty Dharma boat, taking them across. That's his practice. Living beings lacking knowledge cannot see their roots. They are bewildered, confounded, I would say foolish and crazed by the danger and the hardships they are in. The Buddha, out of pity, constructs a Dharma bridge, causing them to mount it through the proper thought. That's his practice. He sees or observes all living beings on a perilous path, constantly oppressed by birth, aging, sickness, death. He cultivates limitless, measureless expedients and vows to completely rescue them all. This is his practice. And then it finally ends, after hearing this Dharma, those in the assembly understood and believed without any doubts or confusion. And without fear or with courage, they understood that the nature is empty and still. He accordingly appears in the 6 paths throughout the 10 directions, universally instructing perplexed masses. This is his practice. So, as we look at these sections, of course, we'll try to come back to this and go into it in some detail. But what I wanted to do was to just get the feel of the flow of this text. And basically, you have kind of 2 themes or 2 ideas emerging very strongly. One is the living beings, the plight of living beings. And for the sake of what we're doing tonight, we're going to talk about this in terms of humans, people, although it includes all those sentient creatures. And that plight is somehow cut up as sort of an anxiety-driven, quiet desperation of an unawakened life. Anxiety-driven is my English, not my own only, but a kind of modern English for dukkha. So it's an anxiety-driven, stress-driven, quiet desperation I pulled from Thoreau. The mass of people live lives of quiet despair or desperation. And then an unawakened life. This description of living beings is kind of universal to all these texts, but I wanted to point out tonight too, it's not, as I did last week, this is not just a Buddhist take on the human condition. This is more widespread. But this matches up, if all of you are familiar with the burning house in the Lotus Sutra. Do you know that parable? How many people know? Okay, so I won't go into great detail. But basically in that, the metaphor is that human existence and the conditioned world that makes up our reality is like a burning house. It's not a cheap house. It was a nice house, or could be a nice house, but every part of it is decaying, on fire, collapsing. The father, the elder, sees this, and he sees his children are inside the house, unaware of the dangers, because they're playing with all their toys. They're completely, online, doing all the stuff. They're just doing their thing, shopping, Googling, the whole thing. I don't know what the latest versions are. What's the latest version you can get now? I see ads for this all the time. You can have these games, video games that you can. Yeah, now you shouldn't know what the latest one is, but go ahead. Which one is? You're a girl and you play girl games. Social media is not a game. Well, it depends on your point of view, but let's not go there. But in any event, you know what I mean. So the modern equivalent is we're caught up in our passions, our pleasures, our pursuits, our diversions, our escapes, and we're inside a burning house, but we're unaware. So this is kind of when it means foolish or ignorant, unaware, it doesn't mean that we're stupid. It means that we're emotionally, psychologically blind. And we do this to ourselves. It's not an inborn condition. It's something that comes as a response to a reality that we find difficult to accept and face. So it's very complex, but the burning house is and then the elder calls out to them to come out, and they say, what for? We're having fun. There's endless games coming. Amazon's going to drop some more off for us, so just get out of our face. And the father says, nah, they're in danger. The house is on fire, and they don't even know what fire is. They're so caught up in what they're doing, they don't even perceive the danger. And so then he comes up with expedients to lure them out of the house because he feels the house is on fire too fast. I can't go in and carry them all out. I have to get them out some other way. Hence, we have the whole chapter on upaya, fangbian, expedient means. So he promises even better toys to them outside, and they all come rushing out, and they get saved. I won't go into great detail about this, but that's this first every line in this text is basically could be taken out that section of the Lotus, the description of living beings. And we look back at we started here, Flowing and turning in a sea, drowning, covered over in a net, or I like a spider's web. I remember the metaphor from Harry Potter. No, that's not Harry Potter. Well, the trilogy of the ring when they get caught in the spider's web, right? That metaphor there. Remiss, negligent, clinging to desires, making fantasy discriminations. Again, the inability or reluctance to look at things clearly and squarely. And so we make a kind of proliferation, prapancha, of all kinds of mental creations. Attached to the self, entering birth and death, this kind of malaise, this sickness, and it's not talking about a physical sickness, this is talking about a kind of despair, despondency, and anxiety, the underlying free-floating anxiety that's associated, not with just modern life, because I want to share some stuff tonight. This goes back into ancient times. But this idea of an unsatisfactory, untogether, unhealthy, troubled existence, and whether one is young or old or in different cultures or rich or poor, this underlying malaise, this dissatisfaction eats at the human experience. And tonight I want to use a little Shakespeare to talk about that, but anyhow, scorched, confused, deluded, all of this you find in the Lotus Sutra. So the second theme, though, emerging from these texts is very interesting because this alone would be a bitter pill to swallow, right? And I'm hoping, you're not coming to Friday night for some morbid, depressing, it all sucks. What it's doing here is describing, not judging. It's trying to describe the unawakened human condition, not the awakened human condition, but the one that most of us find ourselves in, or most people, as he says, most living beings find themselves in because they fail, one, to look at things squarely, and they fail to cultivate an alternative. Both are available, the seeing things clearly and cultivating an alternative, and that's the alternative of and you go in the Four Noble Truths. The first one is suffering, this dissatisfaction. The second one is analytical, the cause of that. The third one is the prospect that there's a way out of that. And the fourth one, which is extremely important, is the actual methodology of doing that. So this is a fourfold built into this text. The Four Noble Truths are built right into this text here. Oh, man. Sorry. I'd like to think that was somebody important, but it wasn't. I don't think. So you have that described. It's a very clear descriptive thing, but I want to also bring out that this is not to have some myopic negative view here that this is presenting a kind of nihilistic despair, but rather these things are brought up to call attention to the unawakened state, not to say that this is the state that is available to people, but rather this is a knotted state. We've allowed ourselves through time and sort of habitual indulgence and maybe anxiety and fear to put ourselves in. So the second part of this is this humane, courageous, compassionate response that you see. This is his practice, this is his practice. The bridge, the road. What was the other one? The bridge, the road. There was a third one. A metaphor that's given. The path. Boat, yeah. So you have basically, again, but these are pangbien. These are the expedients, and these are used throughout the sutra text. The reason they're used is because there is no hint here, purposely, that the Buddha is going to save or could save living beings from this plight. That is not built in. There's no savior here. There's no divine intervention that magically works to pull out. The only way there can be a response from an enlightened being is to teach, to transform, to encourage, to exhort, to lay down possibilities, all of which have to be taken up by oneself. That's why it says, no one liberates you but yourself. No one can, no one may. You yourself must walk the path, cross the bridge. What was the other one? Get on the boat. You yourself must do the Buddha's sages only show the way. That reminds me of a Paul Simon song. See, I really diverge here. Just get on the bus, Gus. No need to discuss, Mus. Go out the door, Jack. Do you know this? 100 ways to get free? Is it like there must be 100 ways to leave your lover. Huh? Just get yourself free, but it's get on the bus, Gus. No need to discuss much. Go out the door, Jack. Da-da-da-da-da. Get on the bridge, get on the road, get on whatever. We do a Buddhist version of that here. Whatever you need to do, get yourself free. But it's get yourself free. You got to get out. So this humane, courageous, compassionate response is the second part of all these verses. Guide, teach, and transform. Literally to show the way home or point back to the original ground. Sometimes in the Zen tradition, it's discovering your original face, your true nature. So this is what's proposed. And if you see this here, it's very interesting because it has the two meanings of what's called the one great matter. In the Lotus Sutra that says, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas appear in the world for the circumstances, the causes and conditions of the one great matter. The one great matter is rendered twofold. One is this potential we have for enlightened perfection understanding called Buddhahood, this nature. That is the one great matter, that it's there, but it's dormant, it's unrealized. They appear, manifest in various ways in the world to catalyze that, to activate that, to stimulate it. But the other part of the one great matter is hidden under that is the condition of mortality and dying and death. And so the one great matter is the matter of birth and death. That we're born, we have a short interval, and we pass. And that some people it's shorter, sometimes it's longer, but as we were talking last week, nobody escapes this. So those combinations, the one great matter of our passing, our impermanence, and the possibility of something deeper and more profound is really at the heart of these teachings. So this sutra text is in many ways a part of the teaching and the transforming of the one great matter, of the way out. But at the same time, always you find in here, and Manjushri, obviously, of being of great wisdom, doesn't have to talk himself into this. He's actually presenting this to the assembly, describing the state of living beings, and by extension, all those who read it in the future, which is us. So, that burning house is kind of like a metaphor for our lives and the world we live in. And it's both a look or a description of our minds, our internal sort of existential burning house of our thoughts and ideas and fantasies and fears and so forth, which, very interesting, can be compared to a burning house because there's no peace or rest. This is a constant state of turmoil and upset. And also sort of a description of the phenomenal world that we actually live in. So both internally and externally, the text is meant to, the burning house is meant to be a metaphor for that very uncontrolled, contingent existence. In the Lotus text, which is directed at Shariputra, and I'm just doing a little bit on the Lotus here because this is coming back to this. He's suggesting to Shariputra, even at Shariputra's advanced stage of cultivation and understanding, he's already apparently a sage of some degree and is not troubled the way that we are troubled with everything. He's reached a certain amount of calm and tranquility and freedom from suffering. And yet, the Buddha is saying to him there's a deeper reality to experience than just escaping from this suffering. And that is what he calls Buddhahood. And so the key to reading this text tonight, because if we didn't do the contextualization, it could seem to be a rather negative view of human existence. And really what it's doing here is both, on one hand, saying the unexamined life, the unawakened life, consists of this burning house experience, this dissatisfaction, this plight. But there's a deeper reality to experience. Without holding that out, I don't see any reason to look at this stuff, really, because it's pessimistic to the extreme. But when you look at it, it's meant to throw cold water on one's face, to stop in your tracks a bit and say, here's what's going on, folks. Really take a look at it. It's like this, really. Despite all the toys and games we have, when you come right down to it, that early hour in the morning when you wake up and go look at things as they really are, you go, whoa, okay, got it. Or, got it, now I'm going to get away from it. But in any event, it's there. But then the next level is to suggest very strongly a powerful, compelling alternative, which is called nirvana, but not in another time, in another life, but in the here and now. So basically, to frame this a little more, what the Buddha is describing is when the descriptive part of this is absorbed by us, and it comes at different ages for different people. It can come at a very young age with your first encounter with real suffering, the loss of something you really love, or a person that you really love, or a town or a culture or a city, a family that you really love, and the separation from that. Or something simple as losing your toy. And you think, wow, silly children. Well, we all have toys, and we laugh at other people's toys when they lose them, but our toys, well, these are very precious to us, whatever they happen to be. And the Buddha said, and then when you have the next realization that this loss is not just personal, it's not just private, it is actually universal, unavoidable, inescapable. All that comes together comes apart. All that's conjoined separates. And this is harder to take. So he said, basically what happens when that realization starts to dawn on us, unless we can step out, and here we go, an attachment to a self, this paradigm paralysis, this little silo, which is what he means by the big foolishness. Unless we can get out of that, if we get caught in that, then there's only three responses, he says, happen. One is a kind of hedonism, an eat, drink, and be merry response. Just grab all I can because of the burning house, my candle burning at both, who's the poet? My candle burns at both ends, it will not last the night. But oh, my friends and oh, my foe, how brilliant is the light. This is sort of a 60s poem, going out with a flash, right? Even though you know it's burning. It's sort of a kind of weird, living on the edge, approaching, playing with death, but it's eat, drink, and be merry. The second one is a thirst for immortality. And so instead of just burning out in a rush, we start to devote our life to prolonging life, sustaining life, and health, with the idea that we might live forever. And the third one, which is an interesting one, the Buddha called this the third thirst, which is a thirst for untouchability, oblivion, a kind of insensate escapism. Very interesting. But it's any means. So if we go in this text and we start looking at these themes, these elements like this, and try to work through, maybe in the next couple Friday nights, try to work through how this is mapping out. Sometimes these sutra texts can seem very difficult and distant. And part of my work is to try to get past or closer to these texts existentially, and to, as much as I can, share my exploration of that with you. Because I really personally feel that these are like jewels, but they need unpacking. They seem very distant from our understanding and frame of mind unless we take them apart like this. I think the reason is because the language is woke-up talk, or wake-up talk. And for the most part, we're in a sleep mode. And so when you're in the sleep mode, the dreamy sleep mode, the woke-up talk rubs. Or it's like in the morning, the alarm goes off and you go, oh, thank you, I'm looking forward to, no, you slam it down and say stop, and you go back to sleep. And it comes again, and you do the same thing. So it's like the sutra comes, like, sutra comes, bang, go away. And so, what it does is if you take it seriously, when it says in this first passage here, living beings become attached to a self, and they enter into this cycle of coming, going, and when they seek a solution, they seek the boundaries to this, they can't get it. They can't obtain it. So this part is the tough part, because even if we hear the woke-up talk, and we say, yeah, okay, but then this part of it points to a kind of dilemma that we don't have an immediate easy out if we really think about it. That's the more difficult part. And so we're kind of stuck. We seek, but we can't get. This is the first perplexity. And if we get, we can't hold on to or keep. So we find ourselves in these dilemmas. That's one of the sufferings. Never getting what you seek is described as one of the forms of dukkha. And so this not getting what we seek is one aspect, but even if we get it, follows we can't keep it and hold it. And then the other part, it's really difficult. We can't hold on to it, but we can't let go either. So this is the sort of the really curious dilemma. So that replies to the self. You can't find the self. You can't nail it down because there is no such entity as an unmovable, unchanging, essential self called me or mine. All we know is everything changes. Everything's in flux, including this. However, we can't really get a hold of that, but we also cannot let go of that. So this is a really, really strange dilemma. Anyhow, what I wanted to do tonight was to play with Shakespeare a little bit, to add the one person who said, yeah, do more Western Shakespeare stuff. He didn't come tonight, so he set you guys up. But this one I want to share with you because to me it's a particularly rich poetic way of somebody who's not a Buddhist. Obviously, William Shakespeare wasn't well, not obviously, but as far as I know, wasn't a Buddhist. And yet he brings up themes that are almost really beautiful, if that's a word you would use here, poignant descriptions of the human condition regarding dukkha. So this one I want to go tonight and play with is one of his sonnets. Again, Sister Boniface made me memorize this when I was in school, so I didn't understand it at all. What was I, 12 or 13 years old? Yeah, it was really funny. It was sort of like, okay, so I'm 12 or 13 years old. This is just bringing back a flash memory now. And I'm immortal at 12 or 13. At 14, I lost a really close friend, and then my immortality wasn't as clear to me because he was my age, my friend Johnny. But in any event, prior to that, I was immortal and had no ideas of this. So I was brought up in the Catholic tradition. In the Catholic tradition, they have certain rituals. Anybody here familiar with the Catholic tradition? One person, okay. Do you know Ash Wednesday? Yeah. So on Ash Wednesday, you go into the church and you kneel down, and the priest comes and he has a bowl of ashes. And he takes his thumb and dips them in the ashes, and then he makes a cross of ashes on your forehead. And then he says something in Latin, and you go, thanks, and you're out of there, and you go play ball again. But then I went home and I said, to my sister, who was very smart, what did he say? And she repeated it, and he says, remember, man, that thou art ashes, and to ashes thou wilt return. What does that mean? And she says, dummy, it means that you came from dirt and ashes, and that's where you're going back to. I said, no way. I was kind of naive at that point. I didn't know where babies really came from. But in any event, it was an attempt to remind one that we come from this almost nothingness and we go back to this nothingness. And that perplexity of what this is then that goes and comes from just this nothingness. What's that about? So here's Shakespeare. For those of you who are following, this is Sonnet 64. And I'm going to do a little back and forth here, see if you can kind of play with the meaning and guess. Here's how it starts. When I have seen by time's fell hand defaced the rich proud cost of outworn buried age. These are the first two lines. Okay, so when I have seen by time's fell hand defaced, reference to? Go ahead, jump in. It's not like an exam or something. It's just like have fun. When I've seen by time's fell hand defaced. The falling hand of time. What do you think? Could be a clock, huh? I like that idea, the falling hand of time. Click, 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 click. Huh? Could be that. Yeah, it could be the falling of time. The defacing that the falling ahead. Now, some of you are going, I got a digital watch, so it doesn't play. Well, it doesn't matter, because basically it's based on a circular movement, right? The rich, proud cost of outworn buried age. So what's being defaced is the rich, proud cost of outworn buried age. What's that about? The rich, proud cost of outworn buried age. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, it's not rap. So, I mean, you maybe make this into rap. I think it'd be a good rap if somebody got really creative on this. When I have seen by times I've had to face a rich, I'm born. Hey, yeah, go. You wouldn't get it any more then. No. Mm-mm. Don't search it on Google. Try to use your inherent understanding here. I know it's going to hurt a little, but play with it.
A sense of loss or cost.
Well, proud cost is like something you proudly pay a lot of money for. You've invested a lot of money, but it's the cost, and what happens? Outworn buried age. So it's this investment we've made in all the spectacular creations, our architecture, our buildings. Basically, outworn buried age are the ruins, like the glories that were Rome are gone, this kind of thing. But it could also be outworn buried age, the loss of your beauty and strength, of stars and starlets, outworn and buried age. Machu Picchu is an outworn, buried, marvelous thing. Most of the great, the pyramids and so forth are examples of this rich, proud cost. A lot was invested in both money and labor, and yet they're just decaying and gone. So then he says, the second passage, when sometime lofty towers I see down raised, and brass eternal slave to mortal rage. So, lofty towers see down raised, raised to the ground. Could be. Go ahead, louder. War. Taking down towers like castles with their towers. Falling of civilization. Actually, you think Twin Towers. Lofty towers down raised.
The metaphor of tower as being a sense of privilege and the privileged.
This I like too. Towering figures.
The next is the more ordinary, being raised. Is that right? What's the
No, raised, R-A-Z.
oh, raised?
Raised down, yes. Louder, you got to go louder. That's true. What goes up must come down, and in a sense, that's what he's talking about here. But it also, going back to your point, it could be towering figures, great figures who are brought down by scandal and shame. And that seems to be eternally present with us. If you just read the New York Times today, you'll see towering figures down raised. And brass eternal slave to mortal rage. So basically the precious metals, corroding, rusting. I was thinking of Arnold Guthrie's song, riding a train past the graveyards of the rusting automobiles. If you ever go to a recycling center, go down to the big transfer station here in Berkeley, and you see all these metal appliances and all the wonderful stuff that we've acquired now just bulldoze into piles of dust and garbage and so forth. When I've seen the hungry ocean gain advantage on the kingdom of the shore, and the firm soil wind of the watery main, increasing store with loss and loss with store. So now he goes to the ocean, observing the ocean. And I've seen the hungry ocean gain. The ocean is sort of like eating. What is it eating? The kingdom of the shore. So California coastline, when hurricanes and things come, they just eat up the shore. The rising sea levels due to global warming is an example of this. So I'm taking Shakespeare from 1500s and saying what he's observing seems to be erosion is, yeah. But then he says, and the firm soil wind of the water remain, increasing store with loss and gain. So how does the soil take back from the ocean? Hawaii. Look at these volcanoes. They're creating, expanding, creating islands, right? As water dries up, land increases. The Salt Lake is now becoming dry. Lake Baikal has a danger of actually drying up, and then the land takes back the water. So he's just saying this is a constant. And he says, when I've seen such interchange of state, and then this line, or state itself confounded to decay. Now he's going, I see the state of affairs, but state, capital S, itself confounded to decay. The actual collapse of dynasties, of empires, of kings and queens, coups, revolutions, our current Congress, confounded to paralysis and decay. Ruin, and this now he goes into his last lines. I'll read the last line and we'll go. Ruin hath taught me thus to ruminate, that time will come and take my love away. This thought is as a death which cannot choose, but weep to have that which it fears to lose. I mean, this is just psychological ability. This ruin, this collapsing of things all around me has taught me to contemplate, to think. That time will come and take my love away. My love could be a person. Could be myself. Yeah, a lot of people, that's their primary and lasting relationship is self-love. Or all that I hold dear, all the things I love, my health, my beauty, my intelligence. When you watch somebody with Alzheimer's, and you see that even the love of the intellect and the mind and memories in this, time will come and take these all away. And then he says this very interesting thing. This thought, the thought of everything passing like that, is like a death, like a paralysis, which cannot choose. It hesitates to choose, but weep to have that which it fears to lose. The psychology of that insight is really profound. That at the time we want something and we're drawn to it, we also have this haunting sense that we can't escape, that by committing to it and getting it, at the same time, we will eventually lose. And the thought that we might lose keeps us from completely embracing, and yet we cannot but embrace. And so this it's really, wow. I think it comes close to the Buddha describing the nature of dukkha, being close to that which we don't want, being apart from that which we love and want, never getting what we seek, and then the blazing flames of the phenomenal world. And yet we find ourselves caught in this, knowing that everything we grab and choose will eventually go away, and yet not being able to not grab and choose. And so this dilemma, this snare, is something, Shakespeare, all the material, memory, family, friends, all of this, all our possessions cannot stay. And so this is what I was reading last week with Robert Frost. Nothing gold can stay was another poetic reference. And it's like everything slips through our fingers. And even our fingers slip through from ourselves. So I'm just bringing this up. This is not just Buddhist, it's universal. The French philosopher Anatole France says, human being, man, meaning humans, are the only animal that knows he or she will die. And this knowledge is a bittersweet kind of ordinary wisdom. And if you look at most of our better thinkers, both East and West, have tried to come to terms with what Shakespeare is describing here, or what the Buddha is describing. Actually, Plato, through Socrates and Plato himself, said philosophy is a preparation or training for death. All of philosophy is starting with and addressing a preparation for this. And if you look at the great Heidegger, Augustine, Kierkegaard, Tolstoy, all of them are in some way or another either motivated directly or inexorably drawn to how are we to make sense of this. So what I'm trying to point out here is both these poets and what we're reading, and both the Buddha, bringing this up. The Buddha brings it up, or the texts bring it up, as a beginning rather than an end. As a beginning of an inquiry and a beginning of an exploration, and not necessarily as the dismal ending of it. And that's the difference between a sort of pessimistic nihilism, despair, and a waking up to a kind of illusory thing. The other part I just go into is what Shakespeare calls the mortal coil. Do you know the mortal coil? Now don't look it up again, Connie. Okay. Ready? Another Shakespeare. We'll take a few more minutes. You all know this one. To be, or not to be. That is the question. Just read the first part. This is Hamlet. Hamlet, facing all of this, then says, what should I do? To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in this mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. Should I just call it quits, forget about it, or should I engage this and directly try? Now he's talking about the dilemma he finds himself with his dysfunctional family, to say the least. But in any event, he's really caught. But you take this as a larger question, should I exist or not exist? When I face this, it seems like I could eat, drink, and be merry. I could trust for immortality, even though I know I can't get it. Or I could pretend and sink into oblivion. But anyway, that oblivion is to not be. So it's to be or not to be. To die, to sleep, no more. And by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to be end of all this. To die, to sleep perchance to dream. He says, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. So he's saying, even if we think we can escape by suicide or oblivion, we pause because we really don't know. Is that really the end? Or is that just another continuation? And this is where Buddhism is really interesting, because basically on this question, because there isn't an end, only a continuation or transformation, then the actual ending cannot be accomplished by suicide. It is merely just changing into another status or another position. It continues. Shakespeare didn't know this, but he knew enough to ask, maybe that isn't really so sweet. Anyhow, the mortal coil, shuffle off this mortal coil. Anybody know that one? We think of a coil of a twisted piece of metal, right? And you're thinking, well, Shakespeare didn't get it. He was dumb. Well, he might have been. Shakespeare never used words without precision. So he used coil, but coil in ancient times actually referred to a mess, a mixture of messy things, just as noise, confusion, uncertainty. So shuffling off the mortal coil wasn't, a steel thing. It was shuffling off the messiness of an unexamined, unfruitful life, so to speak. Anyhow, I wanted to go to so much more, and we ran out of time, and I'm really sorry. But we will come back next week. Last story I'll end with, because I told it once before, but it's more on a humorous side, but it really hits at the psychological truth of this. When I was in graduate school, in one of my previous lives, a fresh student came over from India, had never been to America, and had seen all these wonderful movies about America. And when he got here, he wanted to go see all the sights, but he also wanted to taste some of the things that he didn't have there that he saw here. And what is he most attracted to? A milkshake, a malted milkshake. And so when he came to me, and he used to smoke a cigarette, and the way he smoked a cigarette, he put the cigarette in here, and he closed his hand and then puffed like that, because he said he was from a Brahmin caste, and it was impure to touch the cigarette directly, so he would smoke that way. Regardless, it's just a quirk. Anyhow, as he was sitting there smoking, he said, "Do you suppose you could take me to some place where I could get a milkshake and have that wonderful experience?" And I said, "No problem. We just go down to the corner, place here where they have a fountain." And so I said, "Give him the best, biggest milkshake you can find." He said, "My treat." Oh, he says, "Thank you, thank you." So they bring out this really wonderful milkshake. And he's looking at it and he goes, "Wow, this is even bigger than the movie one I saw." I said, "Yeah." And then they hand him a straw and he says, "What's this?" Which I thought was funny after he was doing that. I said, "Well, you suck it out through the straw," which made sense to him because of the cigarette. Anyhow, so he puts a straw in and he starts to suck. And you can almost see his eyes roll back in his head, like, "Oh my God, this is so good." And then, we're about a quarter, almost halfway down, and he stops, and his face gets a frown and a wrinkle. And he's really unhappy. And I said, "What's wrong? Is it bad? Was there something bad in there?" He says, "No, it's really good." I said, well, why don't you just finish it?" He says, "Because then it'll be gone." And he said, basically, I like it so much, but if I enjoy it, then it'll be gone and it'll be no more. And he was caught in this dilemma, having one's cake and eating it too, but this idea of wanting it, not getting it, not being able to keep it, this kind of dukkha that's built in, is a simple example of this milkshake. What was Shakespeare's last line from the poem? "But weep to have that which it fears to lose." Anyhow, a story just for tonight. Any questions or things before we finish?
There was a question last week.
What was the question last week?
Is patience having us first accept the sadness?
Is patience having to first accept the sadness
Yeah, I think in
regarding
referring to your reluctance poem.
to the Frost poem?
Yeah.
I wonder if that's the one, who into the heart of man was it ever a treason to go with the drift of things and yield with the grace to a reason and bow and accept the end of a love or a season? This is an interesting point because sadness is one response definitely one can have to facing this. And in fact, the Buddha would say the sadness arises from the disappointment that this is how things really are. And so being as they really are could be a sadness, or it could just be a sober facing of something. But the sadness arises because of the expectation that there should be something different. So in a sense, although I understand it, what the text is saying, when we're in the paradigm paralysis of the self and everything is about me and mine, then all we can imagine is a sadness at not getting the me and mine. And so in a sense, it's a predetermined response to not seeing things clearly. That's why these texts are very interesting when the Buddha actually says, when you get outside this paralysis of the self and actually discover true self, true being, there's no more sadness, even at the quote passing, because it's all part of a deeper understanding or a deeper experience of a reality. So I don't know if that's a good question, but it doesn't mean just passively accepting the sadness and sucking it up, because I don't think you can do that. I think it will gnaw. I think it will gnaw. When Shakespeare finished and he said, "Give us pause," pause can be almost like a lifestyle, that we're constantly on hold or constantly in a state of pause. Waiting, wishing, longing, holding back from committing, kind of floating. Freud used the word la belle indifférence, the beautiful indifference. It's kind of like a paradoxical absence of psychological distress, despite being in a situation that's very distressful. And it's sort of like that third truth of the Buddha, the Vibhana Tursna, which is this a kind of oblivion and unfeelingness too. And so cutting it off and pretending or slipping into this sort of indifference, floating, uncommittal, kind of floating existence is one way of dealing with it, but it's a kind of escape denial of it. And sadness is falling into it, which then sadness leads to despair, can lead to depression. And so both of these, in a sense, what the text here is saying is to avoid these two extremes. So sadness at first can be a disappointment that things are not like you want them to be and expect them to be. But as a stopping point, it's actually a kind of illness. And so one has to find some way to get beyond the interpretive sadness experience. Because in a sense, sadness, like anger, arises because our expectations aren't being fulfilled and being met. And so it's actually a projection on that rather than an examination of this. But it's tough to do, it's tough to pull out. Anyhow, I don't know that that's a good answer, but maybe as we go on in the text, because what's presented here is actually a rising above sadness completely. And it's not make-believe and it's not faith-based, but it's actually an alternative experience of joy. This is what's being held out. Anyhow. How are we going to get there? Oh, yeah. How does the song go? Miles from nowhere, think I'll take my time. Oh, yeah, to get there. Look up the mountain I have to climb. Oh, yeah, to get there. And then the song goes on. Oh, my body has been a good friend, but I won't need it when I reach the end, miles from nowhere. No, I'm just playing. We're going to get there. I'm sorry I'm doing it in a roundabout way, but how about I make a promise that next week we'll slip into the alternative. How's that?
Yeah, a little bit of the alternative.
A little bit of the alternative, okay. Anything else? Questions, comments, close for tonight? Okay, we'll go upbeat. But in fairness, if I look at the 10 verses, right, they are riddled with this, and yet at the end of the verses, the alternative is hinted at. So if it's hinted at, it's got to be more explicitly there, and we will get there. Okay, we're going to do the transference in English. And I apologize to whoever was trying to translate tonight in Chinese, because I'm sure this was not easy or fun. No more announcements. Are the monks back from Europe yet? I saw a whole bunch of backpacks out there. Nobody's back yet? Okay. And Heng Sure's still in Australia lecturing tomorrow night, right? Okay. Anything else coming up? Any sessions? Kian, anything going on? What's that? A little louder, please. A session is coming up. 29th of October? That's only like a week away. Oh. A Guanyin session is coming up on the 29th. A 7-day Guanyin? And it's open enough to have an actual Guanyin session? Okay. So one of the things about the Guanyin session is that it allows you to directly experience a taste of this alternative by single-mindedly immersing yourself into a recitation practice. And the beauty of this is not only do you not have to think about these things, but you shift gears and lose yourself in a single-minded, interrupting mad mind kind of experience. And in the interruption of the habitual mind, that interruption creates an interval of space wherein you can actually, without thought, experience a direct return to one's original nature. And that's why it's both an expedient and a direct device simultaneously. So if you've never had a chance to take out 7 days from a busy schedule, take up one of these ancient practices, these mind-interrupting practices that are portals or bridges or boats to a direct experience of something else. This is what that is set up to do. And it runs for 7 consecutive days. There's probably going to be some supporting talks that go with it. But it's the actual immersion in the practice itself that is the teaching and the teacher. So if you have a chance to do something like this, carpe diem, grab it while you can. Okay, let's do the transference. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the three jewels.